explaining to us in detail about ahimsa and how to practice ahimsa. And now I request Dr. Nishant Kumar, co-founder of Thinkpaws DBT, Wellcome Trust UK, India Alliance Fellow at National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore, and the University of Oxford to talk on your topic.
Thank you, sir. And thanks to the pre-panelists who started a nice discussion, pulling people out of their slumber. Are we awake? Okay, so I'm very thankful to our distinguished guests who laid the foundation for non-human discussion, which would be the core of my topic. So on the slide, you can see the idea of information. Do you know how data links with the concept of information? So when you have some coherent structure with the available data, you call it information because that coherence is pre-planned. So otherwise, you can have data which is totally uncoherent, and that's where we call ignorance is bliss. So probably out of 8 billion of us, depending upon whether we are highly privileged or when we are very unprivileged, we can be in a sense of bliss about the ongoing issues in the Middle East and multiple parts of the world. But the aspects of what is war is something I would like to focus upon, and I have tried to scribble a few things which I will try and pepper through the discussion of organismic biology in my talk. So before I go on to specifics of what I would like to discuss about aspects of information and how even non-humans process it, apart from the idea that we are there in an information world, like we have the best of data and its accessibility from us and for us, but there is a huge gap. There are caveats which I think has been illustrated by the previous speakers and eminent personalities in the room. So this inquiry began in the second year of my undergrad, where I asked a simple question: what happened when we lost nature's supreme scavenger, vultures, from the Indian subcontinent? We used to have about 40 million of them. And by the end of a master's dissertation at Wildlife Institute, I got to understand that the breeding density of another scavenger, which people think were doing the same duty, did not change. So when the breeding densities did not change after the loss of vultures, it essentially means that they have different roles in the environment. So that prompted me to start a follow-on study, and that is how we have the only and the best followed urban case study of long-term ecological research in the country, situated in the national capital. So we started to do this research with about 32 sampling units distributed throughout the urban sphere, and trying to understand what happens once you open a human-dominated world to multiple spectrums of non-humans. So my previous speaker was trying to lay down the aspects of coexistence, and it is not something which has a single peak and valleys. It is a mountain range, and that mountain range is very undulating, both at the personal level. So you might be somebody who loves dogs in street X, but depending upon your local situation, you would start to fear, or you might even be antagonistic to another set of dogs, depending upon what they do to you, and vice versa. Again, it is tough to introduce ecological experimental rigor into field systems, but if you follow it well enough, and if you have urban systems like us where coexistence was there before we stamped Western ideology of urbanization, we have the possibilities to utilize variably developed regions into experimental rigor. So you can go into the details of the papers which are there on the screen to understand how fantastically a bird which is just consuming odd grabs from the garbage is responding to the ecological information distributed throughout the human world. So the crux of kite ecology, apart from the idea of where waste is, based on the Islamic practice of tossing meat to them. And it is done near mosques multiple times in the day, throughout the year, and it forms 90% of the breeding kite's diet. It regulates their population responses, and it also regulates the kind of behavior they showcase. So I'm very thankful for the team, the institutions which have supported this long-term ecological research in the national capital, and my fantastic team. Few of those members are there in the corner, so clap for them. So the scene on the eastern border of Delhi prompted me to start this study several years ago. Why so many kites? They are not bees. They are not insects. There are about 10,000 kites you get to see at the peak times of congregation on Ghazipur landfill. This is the top-down view where you can see that the landfill is surrounded by milk system, chicken system, fish system, and fruit and vegetable system. What a fantastic way to plan our urban systems. Kitchen and sink together. I'm using the sink, you know what it is. So in terms of doing outstanding biological research, you have done really well if you do either of these three domains. So we are quite satisfied as a research group to be doing cognitive aspects of research, which means collection and interpretation of information, behavior, which is the communicative part of that information, and of course the demographic part, which tends to create issues. So you can have issues of coexistence, which is profitable. Animals provide a lot of services to you. But in case you have had situations where animals and humans have altercations, it can go negative. The idea of COVID-19 was instilled quite in the beginning of this discussion. So if you have ever noticed, while moving from village systems to urban systems, you see that certain organisms do not tolerate urbanization. And we are in the process of developing a common biological theory as to why is that a case. It is simply on the basis of how information processing by non-humans is impacted by humans in the way we develop the world. And it is simply dependent on the relational aspects of how we process the information. So if we did not have certain coherence amongst ourselves, kya aap hum lunch kar pate? Imagine putting as many chimps here and opening a buffet. Would you have a line? So you need to have a social structure which responds to the resource. And once you have that, you need to have processing of the information as such. So when you see that there is huge congregation on counter one, you just move about, correct? So this is what creates pressures on non-humans to respond. And I've tried to showcase few species on the basis of how differentially they respond to urban systems. It can range from the idea of picking meat in case of black kites that forms 90% of their diet and leads to population level responses. I'm unsure if you've seen this, but we also deployed transmitters on birds which were there on the landfill, and 95% of those birds are migratory. They're not resident birds, they are guest birds, and they utilize these two pathways to enter your system. It is interesting because once you have these micro scale, in the previous slide, to the macro scale phenomena laid upon to you, and we are interestingly in the phase of world after 1970s where we can have this satellite view. So it's a double-edged sword, the idea that you can have this level of information processing as an individual human, which was not available 100 years ago, was it? We had maps, but the maps with this kind of accuracies. So our panelists also talked about oil spills. That was the first time when, apart from land use changes, we got to see the atrocities of our focus on oil. I guess we have never come out of it, and we have all the jokes in the world for us to share. So apart from the issues of bird flu, which consistently tends to impact us, we are creating novel relationships in terms of where resources are, how humans and non-humans are consuming these new aspects and distribution of resources, and it simply gets us into multiple troubles if this data is not coherently placed by people from multiple agencies. So this kind of room where you have social scientists, you have religious experts, you have other kind of stakeholders, even youngsters like him, who are here to add coherence to that information structure, is going to prevent an ominous death of the only living world we have in the universe as of now. So when we are warming a planet, which is also urbanizing at unprecedented rates, in just 50 years, we have plummeted 70% of major biodiversity. So we are in ecological coexistence crisis. And interestingly, again, information age can help us if we put nice way of coherent structure around it. So this is one such example. We talked about wars, and of course, like without defense and military, it is impossible to put anything in the idea of war. I have some quotes from War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, which I will read towards the end. But on 26th of January, we do display the muscle power our country has. Like, we have best of the missiles displayed. And of course, our aircraft, which started displaying certain formation 3 or 4 years ago. So that was the first time they had 100 aircrafts moving in a certain formation. And at that height, their arch nemesis are black kites. So Delhi happens to have the densest breeding density of these birds, about 20 nests per square kilometer. And the place where this parade happens, about 15-kilometer stretch, is one of the best habitats for these birds. So Air Force ने हमें बोला मार दो. हमने बोला I'm a trained conservationist, a wildlife biologist. Unless I have an agenda with the bird, I will not even disturb it. So like, let go the idea of killing it. So they said, pakad lo. So I had to use a very colloquial explanation to let them understand that you are waging war against creatures which have existed here way before the concept of any hominid was around. So these kites and likewise organisms have been around for 25 million years. The oldest hominid, not even humans, our history is just 320,000 years old. So you have just come here like this. So these birds are around for 25 million years. Humne kaha, we can use the simple idea of good science, practice it along with the sociological levels of how people do it, meat tossing, create artificial patches of meat tossing where we get the society's support. And once you do that, you draw kites away and you can have a safe flight path. So this is simply on the basis of how you identify the problem. You already had the idea of how coexistence is developed, and you incorporate it as a solution. So this has become a standard operation procedure for your Republic Day parade every year. I guess somebody must have seen those kind of advertisements in newspaper or on internet. But again, there is so much which nature talks to us, and unfortunately, Indian subcontinent has very few people who have had the opportunity to be trained around these aspects. So we have to work extra hours, and we take all the support from people around us. So in one particular situation, when we were trying to do Jugadu, because in the initial years we were not given enough funding, we saw that if you do the meat tossing, oops, it's not playing. Maybe I have to do it from here. If you toss the meat by putting it on the plastic sheet, the birds stopped responding. So this is the place which is close to 300 years old, called Eidgah. And even when you toss the meat away from the plastic sheet, kites stop taking it. But if you, again, toss the same meat using your own hands, the birds start to take it. So the simple idea of birds consuming this much amount of meat, which forms 90% of the diet, is being read this intricately by non-humans in your system. So it is important for us to understand the levels at which non-humans process the data. I've just given you one particular example. And we think that we learn from each other, see the situation where black kites, which were responding least to the amount of meat which is there on the polythene sheet, start to take it right from the most avoided polythene the moment dogs start to process. So the whole idea of how organisms start to use the coherence or confirmation by other species helps them to form relationships. So humans are not an accident. The whole idea that we want to do things together is just endowment of how life has survived on this planet for 3.5 billion years. And if we cannot arrange ourselves well enough, then we will just be a nice accident on Earth. Yes. So this nice accident is interesting because somewhere in the orderly structure of nature, we as individuals are right in the middle. So a bird, a dog, a human. But then in terms of cellular structure and organization, in terms of organ systems, we all have studied that basic biology. So we are the epitome of that kind of organization. So while you are a single organism within an ecological setup, you are a walking ecosystem for microbiome inside your body. So you have more cells of foreign origin inside your body than your own cells. Did you know that? So should we call yourself humans or bacteria? There are more bacterial cells in your body than your human cells themselves. So I'm just trying to wrap up the discussion by illustrating the fact that dump sites have suddenly changed the course of birds which come from that large area and they congregate predictably. Dump sites have been created in the last 30, 40 years in our part of the world. Of course, this is an example of how we learn the bad aspects of urbanization from the West. And if you do not learn from history, we tend to repeat it. The same goes with the mistakes in terms of how we are supposed to deal with the dog problem. So our research team is also geared on solving the dog problem in the city. And that is where the idea of coexistence, which has been achieved here, can only be solved if we unpack it at the right scales. So dog ecology is not something where dogs have their own satellites, humans have their own satellites, there is a dog court and there is a human court, and both use transscalar approaches. No, dogs do not have those satellites. They're limited by what is happening in the streets. So the solutioning cannot be that, okay, I'm Supreme Court and let me talk about the whole nation when you have such poor data. So after the gap of 20 years, this is my team's first assessment of what your densities are. The older assessments is about 5-6 lakhs. Now we have close to 8 lakh dogs in your system. And they're subsisting on 400,000 feeding receptacles or garbage points. And each of these foraging opportunities are pulling dogs into different behavioral spectrums. So we are in a system where we are trying to solve the problems created by humans by incorporating non-humans or by subjecting non-humans to a lot of unnecessary trauma. And the only thing which can solve it is using a diverse lens. So I'm using this because I guess the pressure on wolves, which became dogs in about 70,000 years, is because of how well they use different lenses. So lens to respond to human food, lens to be with humans. Unless we have something similar on each one of us, we are not going to solve the dog problem. So I will end my discussion by saying that in terms of information, that we can know only that we know nothing. So war and peace are like yin and yang, and the moment you understand your ignorance, there is a pathway of communication, and that is peace. The moment you become confident, that is war, first within yourself, because you have a part of your brain which says that no, you don't know enough. And then you can extend that scale, you can bomb people, continent, countries. So with that, I would like to rest my argument, and thanks for listening.
So thank you, Dr. Nishant Kumar.
I just have a request. I think you were going to quote Tolstoy. You were going to quote Tolstoy. Could I have that quotation of yours from War and Peace?
I did quote. So it was the idea of what wisdom is, or what true wisdom is. And that's where he said that we can know only that we know nothing. So once you have this conjuncture that you are supposed to yearn for more, learn more, and be available to discuss, to have more dialogues, then that's the actual wisdom. We do the reverse of it.
My question to you is,
Yeah.
why does War and Peace remain a classic till today?
It remains a classic.
Why does it remain a classic till today?
It remains a classic till today, and I've not read the actual text. I've only read the summaries of it in multiple senses. But I thought it is pertinent to quote it here because we were discussing the War and Peace. But I can definitely answer you, because War and Peace showcases that the idea of free will is an illusion. And the idea that few people or Übermensch, which is Nietzsche's philosophy, which says that there are like great men who are going to rescue you from systems. Perhaps we have like leaders here, like His Highness here, like he is one leader. Like, but imagine the idea of toughness he has to wield in order to let that ignorance of him be available before others. So when we take him as a person, he has his own pains of the idea of ignorance he has. And again, if I can extend it to the idea of Buddhism itself, we do think that Buddha is somewhere there, and then he got nirvana. आप जब भी आनंद में होते हो, आप अच्छी मिठाई खा रहे हो, when you have the information which is just available for that particular moment, आप उस समय बुद्ध होते हो. So the idea of war and peace is important because it says that the idea of Buddhism is distributed throughout all of us. We should just realize that it is available for us to enjoy, not only for ourselves. You can also enjoy someone else's Buddha, and that is where you form good relationships. So I guess till the time we will be there to enjoy each other's Buddha, there will be relevance for war and peace. Thank you.
Sir, please. Yeah.
Since we have one question. These days, as you mentioned about Gen Z, who are willing to explode, somebody mentioned, whenever any question, for instance, waging peace in times of war, rescuing ecology through universal compassion, the first thing they do is, okay, let us ask Chat GPT, or let's ask Grok, let's ask Gemini AI, or let's ask someone. What is the answer to this very wonderful topic in which we have been immersed since morning? So they, of course, respond, and they will respond according to your own emotions, because they would like a response from you that I like your answer. So you see how they play on the human emotions and sentiments to build their own clientele. So have any of you thought, any of the speakers?
No, I will say
augmented intelligence will take over. I think in 2 years' time, we will be all sidelined because we have failed in our duty as human beings.
Not so much.
So I
Not
will
2 years, 4 years.
I will say that even
It's coming. Thank you. First, Professor.
So when I said implosion, it's actually taken from a Korean philosopher Hong Ju. If you read his work, he had said something what you are saying now 25 years back. And see, technology is imminent. Technology evolution will happen. But I think acts of a child or acts of a smile of a child, act of a Gen Z also amongst this batch, planting water, sitting in a park. If you read my science fiction, so I get a cathartic phase or a cathartic space of writing for peace through my science fiction character called Lucy. So Lucy is essentially a mind state, if you read that science fiction series, which is about a third world order, where we are living in an intergalactic space where everything is hyperbolic technology structure which you are talking of. But even in that state, Lucy looks onto the moon. Lucy looks onto a satellite. I think even in such a mechanistic, robotic society, when robots will become more like humans, humans will crave more to be like humans. I mean, precisely the point that he is saying. Survival and ecological existence is not so substitutability. Survival and ecological existence also cyclically, if you study, because you are speaking of quantum existence, quantum entanglement, at a quantum level, things are not substitutable. Things exist in a metaverse, and that metaverse will stay. Something will be born. Don't worry. Rest assured.
A short answer to your quip, sir. So we think that machines will take over because they're going to be more rational. The trouble of being humans is not in the idea of being rational, it is rationalization. So जब तक हीर रांझा की कहानी होगी, which defies logic. So when you're rational, you cannot be हीर रांझा. Can you be? So कोई भी machine depravity में नहीं होगी. There is no machine which is going to work in depravity. So whatever machine works, the machine which is right before me has been functioning because it has right components of RAM, power supply, gadgets, and software. As opposed to that, life forms and the diversity which we get to see, the millions of organisms, we have not documented 70% of them. So life showcases that a simple bacteria can cover almost all niches on Earth, one single cellular organism. So abhi computer ko bahut janam lagenge, sir. So nature has taught us that we can be functional in rationalization. And I guess humans are best example. Of course, there are vices, but we are doing better. And there is space for us to do better. So, abhi machine ko bahut janam lagenge.
Just to give you a little bit hope, if you study machine consciousness literature, which is evolving now, even if I sum up machine consciousness as a sum of all electrical impulses in my body, I'm a bacteria.
Okay.
So, for instance, even if you study machine consciousness and read the latest papers which are also coming up. So, as he said, I am a bacteria, I'm more of a bacteria, I'm more of an electricity, if you imagine yourself. So, there are almost about 80 million neurons more in your stomach, and now 40 million actually is in your stomach and 40 million in neuron, but these are essentially electrical impulses. So, if you see these robots taking over these 80 million neuron impulses, the meta-consciousness theory says there's something undefinable what happens at a quantum level even in those electric impulses. And that's what the Hir Ranjha is.
Have some questions from the floor, please. If anyone would like to ask, and if you can address it either to somebody in the panel or the panel in general. And panelists are also free to ask questions from each other. Please keep the question short and to the point.
You will stay here, okay? I will sit. I'll go there.
Yeah. Dr. Nishant.
Thank you so much, everyone. Now that we have a chance, like Gen Z before us, so from a millennial to Gen Zs, if each one of you could share one thing which gives you hope and one thing which kills your hope, each one of you, so that will be cool.
One can go in whichever order.
Hope for me, I don't know. I think I see hope in everything that I see around me. Even if there's, I go for volunteering a lot, and I won't say I've seen a lot, but for my 25 years of life, I think I've seen a lot of suffering around me. But then still, I see a little bit of hope in every suffering that happens around me. And even in hope, there's suffering that I see sometimes. People have a lot of things, but then people are not happy with it, not content. So there's this comparison that I always make and try to keep it inside my mind, that don't be like that. Be happy, be content, hope for the best. Thank you.
We all of us live to see another day. I think that itself is something that we are hopeful of, although it's not guaranteed that we'll live to another day. Likewise, what gives me the most hope is the supreme qualities of compassion and wisdom that is within every being. Whether that person is rich or poor, it doesn't matter, because these are intrinsic qualities and these are the basic foundation for hope. We should be hopeful to change our nature so that we can connect ourselves to our intrinsic self. That is the primordial wisdom in each and every one of us. But for that, we have to be hopeful. And what kills hope is too much of self-centeredness. We're talking about environment, but first of all, before embracing such an extensive concept, we have to eliminate all differences. Differences like you are Hindu or a Muslim or Buddhist or a Christian, petty differences we keep our homes clean, but we litter on the ground. I don't see this in Sikkim. We rarely throw plastics on the road. But here in Delhi, I don't know, it's a custom or it's very natural for people to eat street food and throw everywhere else. And these are educated people. I think we need to bring about change. I hope the youngsters in Delhi, especially in mainland India, they learn a lot. They can learn from the Himalayan people in Ladakh, Himachal, Sikkim, and all these places. We are, I think, very much connected to the nature. Thank you.
Hope for me is keep going and doing good things and sometimes bad things also.
So I am hopeful about this conference happening. Hopeful because we are still talking. There's no ground there where no one is else standing. So that is the most hopeful thing for human. Without hope, we cannot live anyhow. And second, I am not hopeful. And hopeful, I am hopeful with renewables. I am hopeful with AI. Very hopeful. In my it will enhance humanity or otherwise will destroy, but it will do something big. And I am not hopeful about the thing that indecisiveness in human beings, especially in our policy level, and that things like if most positive person wants to do something and you remain indecisive, they lost their passion for the things and then it's gone. The opportunity is gone. It's instinct that I want to do, and if not, then for a long time they cannot fight always, because life everyone needs to live. That misfortune thing.
So hope for me is like I'm growing even like a baby step. I'm doing growth for myself, and losing hope is what I'm doing. Sometimes corruption or this will break the queue. Like if I'm going to serve a government exam, there is a chain which is blocked by some corrupted people, which breaks my hope.
So for me, hope is like seeing certain things. Like recently, the Supreme Court there was this particular incident regarding dogs in Delhi. So I see some small children like him who are like very much aware about dogs. They do good things for street dogs and all. Particularly, I am xenophobic person. So, but still, I see and I try to do things. These kind of things give me hopes. And sir, like you asked, most of the people ask questions about Gen Z, and me including being a Gen Z, I have a very thing that kills my hope, that Gen Zs are unfortunately easy to manipulate. Old people with their experience have their time, they try to, they argue on this. Gen Z, we do also argue this, but we have a very unreasonable arguments. If we see a reel on Instagram showing about making a narrative regarding this, let's take an example of Aravali. I know a lot, I don't want to say certain things, but we all know what happened during the Aravali crisis. But Gen Z were all going out, they were taking sites and all. Yeah, these kind of things kills my hope.